Welcome to the Texas Values Report. This is Jonathan Sines, president of Texas Values. Great to be with you on another glorious week in the state of Texas. Wow, it's going to be interesting to see what things look like in Texas this weekend as a lot of businesses are now opening up. Many of them only at the 25% capacity rate, but maybe life sort of getting back to normal or feeling a little bit getting back to normal. As a matter of fact, I'm sitting right outside Bill Miller Barbecue, watching people come in and out, watching a beautiful American flag flowing in the wind here. And so, one of the popular businesses here in Austin and Central Texas, they do have a pretty strong drive-through business and following, but they do have an inside area. And so there are people here parked in the parking lot. So we're going to see how that goes this weekend. So hopefully you're able to get out and about if you feel comfortable to take in your favorite food and drink wherever you like to go. Bill Miller's a great barbecue place, great place for breakfast tacos. That's where I like to go for breakfast tacos and sometimes after church. But the drive-through has been handy. It's not far from where I live. But we're going to talk about this issue a little bit as it relates to faith, family, and freedom. If you're new to the Texas Values Report, this is a weekly radio show, and we also do it live here as you're seeing us, if you're watching live on Facebook. And hey, while you're watching us, if you're watching on Facebook or if you're watching it on YouTube, give us a like, give us a subscribe. You can share right now, and you want to ask some questions, make some comments while we're doing this broadcast. Please feel free to do that. We've been running this radio program now for over 5 years, so it's exciting to do that through our friends at the Christian radio station, The Bridge. And so, but we've been doing a video component of it too for probably about a year or so, even before we all got pushed to do things from home and broadcast a little bit differently. But one of the reasons we do it is because, we work in the issues of faith, family, and freedom, but also in the venues of the courts, the legislature, and the media. And while our work is focused on what happens in Texas, there's no question that Texas is impacted by what happens in other parts of the country. And Texas certainly has an impact on what happens on the rest of the world. And so the guest that we have today is going to really give us a good insight on what's happening on these issues of faith, family, and freedom across the country, as many of us really respond to what's happening with the coronavirus, respond to government rules, regulations, a lot of those being lightened up and being pulled back, so to speak, and opened up. And, it's going to be really interesting this first weekend, maybe for a lot of churches that are going to reopen. That's a big issue that we've worked on. And there's no question that our friends at Family Research Council are one of our strongest national partners. And they are very focused on these issues, particularly as it relates to the freedom of churches and really getting good information out to people to give them guidelines and insights on how to navigate these changing rules over the past 3 to 4 weeks. So David Closson is going to be our guest today. He is the director of Christian Ethics and Biblical Worldview at Family Research Council. We're glad to have him on and meet with him. He's going to be a part of our video if you're watching it live, or if you're watching on a radio or listening on radio later on. We want you to share this with friends. David, welcome to the Texas Values Report.
Hey, it's great to be here with you, Jonathan. And that talk of barbecue and breakfast tacos, that definitely made me hungry. But thanks for having me.
Doesn't it? Hey, if you haven't been down to Texas, or if it's been a while, we're going to have to get you down here. We, whether it's Rudy's Barbecue or Bill Miller Barbecue, when we have events, we use a lot of their products, so to speak, and they're a real hit. And so, but I know you live up in the DC area. I went to a place up there too a long time ago that tried to do barbecue. They did a pretty good job. I'm not all that picky, particularly when I'm out of the state of Texas getting some barbecue. But I think from that lens that you're at, at the national level, the DC level, a lot of activity as it relates to the coronavirus, a lot of activity as it relates to the freedom of churches, religious nonprofits, and others. And I know your team there at Family Research Council, y'all been working hard to help people navigate that issue. Tell us a little bit about your role at Family Research Council, and then let's have our discussion about some of the issues related to religious freedom.
Absolutely. So, Jonathan, I serve as the Director of Christian Ethics and Biblical Worldview at Family Research Council. And what that really looks like is I'm looking at the major issues that we cover in faith, freedom, family. So religious liberty, the life issue, issues related to human sexuality, and just seeking to provide a theological perspective, helping Christians to think about these things through a biblical worldview. Recently, a poll came out that said only 7% of Americans have what you could call a biblical worldview. So one of the things we're trying to do is just come alongside churches and other organizations and help Christians think through these really important issues from the perspective of Scripture. So I'm privileged to do that here in DC, in our nation's capital.
Well, it's great to have you a part of the program. You know, Tony Perkins and General Boykin and all the great people there at Family Research Council have been great friends of ours. I know we've had them speak at numerous events that we've had and also been a part of this program. And there's no question that really having that outreach, having that insight, and having that connection to the faith communities, the Christian churches, and leaders across our country is extremely important. And particularly during these last 3 to 4 weeks, we work on these issues on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure your team does as well. And so, you usually kind of have an idea of what your schedule is going to look like, certain months or, kind of a yearly schedule, certain events are going to come up. But we also know that working in this field, things come up that are unexpected and you got to be ready to respond. I tell you what, this is one of the few times or one of the times where we've had some of the highest level of interaction between church leaders and other religious nonprofits, really with the question of what can I do? What am I allowed to do? What's the current, ruling? Was there a court case? What's going on? What's the law saying on these issues? And so, we also feel honored we've been able to help a lot of churches and nonprofits navigate that. But this is only us doing it for one state. Y'all are doing it at the national level. Talk to us about what the latest is and some guidance that y'all are providing for churches, particularly as a lot of them look at opening up this weekend for the first time in several weeks.
Oh, absolutely, Jonathan. We appreciate what you're doing in Texas. We know that Texas really has led the way. We've been really appreciative of the governor and the attorney general going back as late as March 31st, when Governor Abbott put out his executive order designating churches essential services. And that's really been a model for the rest of the country. But you're absolutely right. These last couple of weeks, we've had to adapt in ways that we've never had to do before. And we know that churches have had to do that as well. And although it's been difficult, I talk to pastors on a daily basis who just talk about the fact that they wish they could be meeting with their congregations. And there's a hole in our hearts. All of us wish we could these last 6-7 weeks be with our congregations. And it's right that we feel that way. Scripture is very clear in Hebrews 10 that we shouldn't neglect to meet together. But in extreme circumstances like we find ourselves in, it hasn't been safe. And what's really been interesting is seeing how churches have responded. I've been blown away, Jonathan, with how churches have just been so creative in the ways they've adapted to meet the needs of their members and their broader communities. A couple of things that we've seen just looking at churches all across the country is the way churches have used technology. Churches that maybe were live streaming some of their services, but not really putting a lot of effort into it, have really been able to use that technology to stream their services to thousands of people that previously wouldn't have even seen the live stream. I talked to a pastor the other day that said dozens of people have come to faith in Christ by watching their live stream. Another thing that we've seen is churches holding drive-in services. They can come to these services, stay in their cars, abide by CDC guidelines, and yet still be able to have some sort of fellowship. So it's been cool to see churches be very creative in how they administer to their members, but also the way they've ministered to their broader communities. And I'll just give you 2 examples from Texas that we've highlighted. I've talked to these pastors. One church in Temple, Texas, one of their members actually just said, we should just start a prayer ministry. So they set up a tent in their church parking lot and just put a sign out by the road that said, if anybody needs prayer, they were welcome to come in. And they said dozens of people each day have pulled into the church parking lot and they've been able to pray for them and minister to them. Another example was in Houston, a church plant. So this is a church that had only had public services for 3 or 4 weeks when the coronavirus forced them to stop meeting publicly. And the pastor of that small church plant realized that in Houston, there was a shortage of ways for homeless people to wash their hands. So he went down to a store, bought some sink basins, some hoses, and set up all these stations throughout Houston for homeless people to be able to wash their hands. So it's just been so encouraging to see people with a great commission mindset serving their communities during these times. And I hope that this kind of creative thinking is something we don't lose as we begin to come out of this time.
Yeah, well, look, it's interesting too when you see people do that, when you see them really respond, because this thing that started 3, 4, 5 weeks ago really wasn't all that expected, or, people weren't really sure how it was going to impact certain things. And so it wasn't like churches and ministries had a lot of opportunity or time to kind of plan. And that's the way life is sometimes, right? These things happen and you just try to adjust. And so I think it's been encouraging to hear a lot of great examples of that. And there was some legitimate concern about the government restricting churches. And I don't think there's anything wrong with people pointing to that and saying, look, let's make sure this is temporary. And I think the church overall has been fairly understanding and really selfless in a lot of ways. And some churches don't have that technology. Some of them are just doing the best they can. But now that we see things opening up, maybe some, ways to do things differently or adjust, or new people that have come across the church that maybe they wouldn't have before. And so we hope some of that lasts. And we hope too that we see less of these examples of government leaders that, really are just, I just think they're focusing on the wrong things. If you're giving $500 tickets with cars that are 6 to 8 feet apart from each other in a parking lot, it just seems like your focus is in the wrong place. But in such a small amount of time, we've seen these things happening. And so hopefully you can have some of these government leaders that will realize that those things are temporary, and the churches have been understanding, and you can also trust them to be responsible. Look, I think it's fair to say they don't want people getting this virus, or they don't want to be a part of spreading anymore either. But it's finding a way to balance that, putting safety measures in place. We've got some great guidance from our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, and our Governor, Greg Abbott, that have been out for about a week and a half. That you can go to our website, txvalues.org, to see those guidelines. And I think Family Research Council has some that they've been sharing as well.
That's right, Jonathan. And I want to just underscore the point that you just made. You're absolutely right. By and large, the vast majority of churches have worked well with their local governments, and the vast majority of state and local governments have been good. And churches have been understanding, realizing that there is, in a pandemic like this, there is a compelling interest, and some of these actions that have been in place are kind of the least restrictive means. However, there have been some bad actors. I know in Kentucky, Mississippi, and Washington, there's been some overzealous mayors who have gone out of their way to penalize churches that are hosting drive-in theaters. And that's why I really appreciate your Attorney General, but as well as Attorney General Barr, who earlier this week put out some guidance. And he said that, the Constitution is not suspended in times of crisis. And I appreciated him saying that. But you're right. At FRC earlier last week, we put out some guidelines that you can see on our website at frc.org/church. And that website is all of our coronavirus related resources. But we've just put out some common sense guidelines that as churches are able to begin reopening, they can think about just ways to do this that are safe, but they can start opening their doors. And happy to go through a couple of those criteria if you'd like, but people can see the full document on our website at frc.org/church.
Well, and I encourage people to do that. One of the things too, I think people need to be aware of at the state level here in Texas, one guidance is a little bit more particular to our state, and it's caused some confusion, or it's been a question that's been asked. This week on Monday, our governor did a press conference reopening retail businesses, restaurants, and so on, but with a 25 capacity limitation, if you will. And a lot of people were asking, well, does that apply to the churches? That question's been asked probably more than just about any as it relates to churches. The answer is no. And the reason is because churches were allowed to open before that, this announcement on Monday. And they were always considered essential services. And so the ones that were open Monday, they're termed a little bit different, or a different category, whether people agree with it or not. I'm just saying how the governor's office treated it. So, but that doesn't mean that that it might not be prudent to look at that as a capacity number. Churches are going to have to just look and see what type of space they have and how many people are going to be there, and decide what works for them. And some of them may need a little more time to catch up on these things, to, find some sanitizer, set up some places where people can wash their hands more, or have a better system in place about how they let people in and out to make sure that you've got that social distancing. And so So I think, having as much guidance as possible is important. And so, but that freedom's there. If they want to open up this week and they want to have these guidelines in place, it makes sense, but you don't have to have it at 25% capacity. At least you're not required to by law. Now, some other states may be treating it differently, and that may not come into play. And we may see that change very soon. And just a good reason to stay connected with us. But I'd like to hear what you're hearing, David, from churches that that are thinking about opening up. And I would imagine many of them, they've got some understandable concern because they want to limit the spread and they want people to be safe. But I would imagine some of them also, are encouraged that now they get to make that decision. It's not the government telling them what to do. Now that freedom's back in their hands.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. And the pastors that I'm talking to on a daily basis, they're itching to get back. These are pastors who love shepherding their flocks. They love what they do, and they want to be back. And they also, they want to honor the governing authorities, which as Christians is what we want to do. Romans 13 is very clear that God is the one who institutes the governing authorities. Paul tells us elsewhere that we should be praying for those who are in authority. And so, the pastors I talk to, they want to get back together as soon as possible, and yet they want to honor those who are in positions of authority. And so that's why at FRC we put together this guidance. Again, that there are just a lot of practical things that we're encouraging churches that when they're able, across the country, President Trump's plan actually calls for 3 phases. And in all 3 of those phases, churches are allowed to open their doors. Now, at each phase, the White House recommends that you limit the capacity, that you practice social distancing, and as you're able to go up to from phase 1 to 2, 2 to 3, you can open up the capacity a little bit more. But throughout these phases, what we're just encouraging pastors to do is just practice best practices as far as sanitation. And some of these are simple. That means just requiring people to use hand sanitizer when they enter in to your building. Some churches are thinking about taking the temperature of people when they walk in their church building to make sure no one has just a high fever. We're also, especially in the early phases of the president's plan, recommending that high traffic areas remain closed, which would include nurseries and youth group rooms. But that if a church does decide to open them, that they follow the CDC guidelines on nurseries and youth groups, which actually we link to that on our page. The CDC has specific guidelines for even that. And we're also just, as far as kind of best practices, a lot of churches pass around an offering plate. And we're saying rather than do that, just put something in the back of your sanctuary, like a central collection place where people can put their tithes and offerings. If your church passes around the sacraments for the Lord's Supper, rather than pass that around, have individual people come and receive the elements. And then even as far as seating, depending on how your church is configured, whether you have individual seats or you use pews, we're encouraging churches to, again, continue practicing social distance, have family units sit together, rope off every other pew or put 2 seats in between family units. So these are just things, and as we ratchet up the different phases, we'll be able to phase some of these out. But just in these first few weeks, where there's going to be some trepidation, I know a lot of people are nervous. And so especially in these first couple of weeks, churches should consider continuing their live streams. Maybe they could continue drive-in theater or drive-in services. Or one thing that we're seeing some churches say that they're going to do is have services where they're just for those who are immunocompromised, elderly, those who have underlying medical conditions. They'll have a service where they'll where it'll just be for those people to come. And so again, like we saw during this whole pandemic, churches being creative in how they've adapted. We're seeing churches already thinking creatively on how they're going to reopen in a safe way, but where people can begin coming back to church.
Look, and it's interesting how creative people can be, and look, it's a benefit of the technology that we have these days that we're blessed with, but also I think it's a reminder of how essential, and I'm going to use that word essential. It was a great day when Governor Abbott made it clear that church services are essential, and so for so many of us, it is bread. I mean, it is water. It's real to us. And it's also something that's been a part of our lives. And so, and it's great to see church leaders realize, you know what, let's find a way then. Let's find a way to reach our people. And also for those of us that are not in a leadership at church, let's find a way to have the technology at home or to find a way to meet those needs. I know that's, we were having church in my home. And so it's great to see that we still have the ability to do that. But I think now the freedom, that in-person connection can be extremely valuable. But it's great that we're able to adjust. And many of us may continue to adjust. Maybe people want to stay safe. And we're blessed that there are ways to do that and ways to turn to each other in our own homes. David, it's been great to have you on the show today. We're going to be wrapping up here in a few minutes. I've got some concluding comments, but we're going to let you get about your day as I make those that are some other things that we're working on. But it's been great to have this discussion with you. Great to hear about your work at Family Research Council. Glad you're a part of the team up there. And please tell Tony and Kana and General Boykin and all the team up there that we continue to pray for them and how important our friendship is with that great organization y'all have.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for having me. Thank you for your prayers. And we absolutely here in DC are grateful for the frontline work that Texas Values does every week. So continue the work, stay safe, and God bless.
Excellent. You heard their resource, frc.org/church. A lot of news this week, too, about what's happening in Texas. Today, if you're watching this live, it's the first day for people to have retail businesses open. That's restaurants, that's retail stores, and so on. But, and look, maybe the first weekend that a lot of churches are saying, okay, we're ready, or we're closer to getting ready. I'm hearing maybe a couple of weeks from some other churches, hey, we get that. It's up to you to decide. And that's the main thing for churches to know. Now the government's not going to punish you. You get to decide when you're ready. You get to decide when that freedom works for you. And there are a lot of guidelines to navigate, and we're trying to be sensitive to that. So FRC's got some great resources. We've got a few more that are Texas specific at txvalues.org. That 25% capacity is not in play for churches, but it might be something responsible for churches to consider that works for them. But we encourage people to be aware and see the value and to check out the guidelines. If you want to make sure that you're following things as closely as recommended in the guidelines for the state, the best way is to follow the guidelines from the Attorney General's office that we have on our website, txvalues.org. But a lot of discussion about the reopening of Texas, more so this week. Look, the economy is struggling in some different ways. The oil and gas business is struggling in a lot of different ways in the state of Texas. And that's, been related to people not moving out and about as much, right? I mean, look at what gas prices are. Think about how often you're filling up. And it's not just people that own oil businesses. There are people that service the oil business that in different ways that it impacts the economy in so many different ways, so many different industries that use fuel in different ways that are impacted by some of these things, and people that are involved in shipping and so on. So, think about, if you think about how many things those things can impact, that can be a lot of different families, a lot of different jobs. And so I think now that people are starting to be able to get out and about a little bit more, you'll see some of those things recover. And hopefully a lot of people are able to hang on, for those 3 or 4 weeks before things got much worse. And, look, we're understandable to that. One of the victories that happened during this time period, though, was that abortions were halted for at least 2 weeks, if not a few days more. We estimate that 2,000 lives were saved during that time. We filed a brief with the Fifth Circuit, U.S. Federal Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to support what Governor was doing, Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton on this issue. And great to have a governor that knows the value of life. Otherwise, with the pressure, some might have altered that and said, oh, well, maybe we'll give an exception for abortions. Not Governor Abbott, not Attorney General Paxton. And they fought to great lengths. We've got our brief on our website, txvalues.org. Also, if you want to read the court's opinion, the court saying that abortion services is not essential health care and that they're not an exception. Look, if you can't go to church, and that was allowed, it'd certainly be constitutional to say that for a time period that abortions would be halted as well. I mean, the abortion issues were not in the First Amendment or any of the amendments to the Constitution, even though they've been interpreted that way in the past 50 years or so. But the First Amendment of the Constitution was written that way about religious freedom from the beginning. So, but that's another reason why we need your support financially, because the fights that we have to get involved in to stop the abortion groups, to stop the hostility to religious freedom, and people, some local government officials that still want churches to be closed, churches wondering what their rights are. We've gotten so many phone calls, had a great town hall with the lieutenant governor this week, and have had several other fantastic guests. The legislative session's not going to be far away. Our policy forum is going to be coming up likely in September. We're already planning for that to really help you out on the issues of faith, family, and freedom. That's why we need your financial support. Go to txvalues.org, make a tax-deductible donation today. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're the largest group in the state of Texas that works on the issues of faith, family, and freedom as it relates to the courts, the legislature, and the media. We're going to have some big updates next week as we roll into May. We look at phase 2 of what the governor's office is going to do as it relates to the coronavirus issues. But we also look at what's going to be happening at the State Board of Education. What's going to be happening in Austin ISD? Are they still going to teach sex ed now that they're teaching remotely and that they're not going back to the school at all? I mean, shouldn't we just focus on core subjects? I know there's a lot for parents to adjust to. And so we're still active on those issues at the state and local level. And that's why we need your support to continue to do that work at the highest level. So go to txvalues.org. We believe it's the best investment, the best donation you can make for faith, family, and freedom in the state of Texas. And we'll talk to you next week on the Texas Values Report.